Indeed, sir.
Oh, all right. Father, would you grab a mridanga?
Yeah.
Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Gurudasa Jayadvaita Swami Niti Namine Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrindam Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jai Om Vishnupad Paramamsa Parivrajakacharya Stotra Shata Shishma Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramamsa Parivrajakacharya Stotra Shata Shishma Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Shila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. प्रेम से खोर श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंद राधा कुंद गिरि गोवर्धन की श्रीमद् भागवतम की कृष्ण बलराम की all glorious to some of devotees, all glorious to some of devotees, all glorious to some of devotees. Nitai Gaur Premanandi.
Hari Hari Bol. Thank you so much, Radhesha and Deva Prabhus. And thank you, Tulsi Priya, for the Nrsinga Wing screen share in Mayapur. And welcome to everyone for Srimad Bhagavatam class with His Holiness Jayadvaita Swami. It is Friday, March 1st, 2024 in New York. And we are reading tonight in third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 28, starting with text number 39. Very grateful that Maharaj could be with us tonight. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Yatha putrachcha vitachcha pritan martya pratiyate apyatmatvena bhimatad dehade purushastata. Because of great affection for family and wealth, one accepts a son and some money as his own, and due to affection for the material body, one thinks that it is his. But actually, as one can understand that his family and wealth are different from him, the liberated soul can understand that he and his body are not the same. Purport. The status of real knowledge is explained in this verse. There are many children, but we accept some children as our sons and daughters because of our affection for them, although we know very well that these children are different from us. Similarly, because of great affection for money, we accept some amount of wealth in the bank as ours. In the same way, we claim that the body is ours because of affection for it. I say that it is my body. I then extend that possessive concept and say it is my hand, my leg, and further, it is my bank balance, my son, my daughter. But actually, I know that the son and the money are separate from me. It is the same with the body. I am separate from my body. It is a question of understanding, and the proper understanding is called pratibuddha. By obtaining knowledge in devotional service or Krishna consciousness, one can become a liberated soul. Om Ajnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistang Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalang Shri Gurun Vaishnavams Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitangs Tang Sajivam Sadvaitam Savatutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitangs Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Kapila Dev here is continuing his talks with his mother, explaining the differences between the various elements and the possessors of the elements, or here the difference between the self and the money, the self and the children, the self and the body, the self and the arm and the leg, etc. Later in the purport, Prabhupada references the word pratibuddha, the proper understanding. This is from the previous verse, which we understood to mean awake, someone who's not in a deep sleeping state, someone who can see what is going on in his life. That's the proper understanding. Otherwise, the understanding is abhimata, intimately connected. This is echoed in the next verse as well. He's giving lists of examples of how one thing is different from the elements that compose that thing. So the intimate connection makes one think that, like, for example, I am intimately connected with this body, therefore I think me, it's mine. And at the end, Prabhupada says that by obtaining knowledge in devotional service, you can become a liberated soul. The problem is, in the material world, not many people want this. They do not want to be liberated. They want to be more and more pleasantly entangled as possible. They want a really good, compelling, strong illusion, like some people want strong drink or strong drugs. For most people, the idea of religion being too thoughtful, philosophical, analytical is too bleak. It robs you of your fun. And so what can be said about that? Anyway, I'm hoping that Maharaj would have something to share on this verse. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
I really don't. I think it's straightforward and you've covered it well. I have nothing to add.
We have a question in the chat box. There are people who say that we are our bodies. If I have occasion to talk to one of them, I ask, so, if you lose your leg, do you become less of a person than you were when you had it? Is someone born with a deformed heart less of a person than someone who is born with a properly developed one? Usually no answer to that, Tulsi Priya says, so more of a rhetorical question, maybe. Tulsi Priya, would you like to read verse number 40? Maharaj has no comments here.
There's a comment in the chat from Saraswati Mataji. I can read it if you like.
Yes, please.
Pranams. Is the soul's affection for another soul sinful because affection is to only be for Krishna exclusively, or sinful because those souls that we are attached to belong only to Krishna?
Affection is not necessarily sinful, but it's a question of what our understanding is. One of my godbrothers one time said to Srila Prabhupada, I can never go back to Godhead. I'm too much attached to my wife. Prabhupada said, that's already all right. He said, that is through Krishna. So affection for other living beings in Krishna consciousness is not condemned. Krishna exclusively. Krishna means with his devotees. But everything should be in relationship to Krishna, not separate from Krishna.
Sorry, wasn't muted. Priyanka Mataji says, Hare Krishna. Out of all family members or relationships, the son is emphasized or mentioned explicitly. Can there be any reason for it?
I'm sure there's a reason, but I don't know what it is. Certainly that's a strong affection. Sometimes in verses we find it's wife, or in Prahlad Maharshi's instructions also, the affection of the father for the daughter and so on. So son can be taken as the example of bodily relationships.
Also here, the speaker is the son and the hearer is the mother.
Good point.
Vijay Krishna Prabhu has question number 1. How do you explain that devotees are liberated souls when we all know that they do cultivate attachment for Lord Krishna? In other words, how are we liberated while being attached to Krishna? What kind of liberation derives from being attached to Krishna? Please and thank you.
Want to cover that, Kendra?
Well, I feel that Vijay Krishna Prabhu may know the answer to this one already. It seems like that's sort of a question. That's the whole point of Krishna consciousness, to become attached to Krishna, who's eternal, ever well-wishing Father of all living beings. There's a difference between the results one derives from being attached to Krishna, who is beyond the material manifestation, and being attached to things of this world that just kind of flutter away or fritter away or rot. So that's the benefit one gets. And Tulsi Priya adds to that, liberated from illusion. Attachment to Krishna is freedom and liberation. And Priyanka says, thank you, Maharaj. Tulsi Priya, would you be up for reading text number 40?
Yes, sir. Okay. Text 40. Yatolmukad vishpulingad dhumad vapi swasambhavat apyatma vena bhimatad yatagni pritag ulmukat. Translation: the blazing fire is different from the flames, from the sparks, and from the smoke, although all are intimately connected because they are born from the same blazing wood. Purport: although the blazing firewood, the sparks, the smoke, and the flame cannot stay apart because each of them is part and parcel of the fire, still they are different from one another. A less intelligent person accepts the smoke as fire, although fire and smoke are completely different. The heat and light of the fire are separate, although one cannot differentiate fire from heat and light. This is pretty self-evident. I was looking up the phrase part and parcel the other day, and if I recall correctly, basically they're saying that for something to be part and parcel means it's integral. In other words, it's just part of the thing, and it's not it's not it can't exist on its own. So when we say part and parcel of the fire, a spark cannot never exist separately on its own. It's always the has its source in fire, in the larger fire, and the same goes for smoke, and of course the flame. So there's no, as Prabhupada's saying, it's distinct. They're but each one of those things we recognize them as different, but none of them can exist separately from fire, in the I don't know if aggregate's the word, but the fire in the main. But as he also says here, a less intelligent person accepts the smoke as fire, although fire and smoke are completely different. So maybe to use a practical example, somebody less intelligent sees smoke and mistakenly thinks, a house is on fire or something, but you have to ascertain, is there actually a fire? Is the smoke something, trivial or whatever? You cannot jump to a conclusion. So in the same way, we can't mistake the associations that we are attached to for the real thing. Like Maharaj used the example of a man being attached to his wife, and Prabhupada says that's okay because it's through Krishna. But say you're a devotee and you have a wife, and then she becomes inimical, then she has to be, given up if there's no saving her. So we cannot mistake, just because there's some connection to Krishna doesn't mean it's absolute. We can't, or how some people say sometimes, well, everything belongs to Krishna, so if I'm attached to my wife or I'm attached to my husband, that's as good as being attached to Krishna. No, that's not how it works. There has to be some kind of conscious or living connection, not something that we concoct sentimentally. It's like, oh well, my dog is part of Krishna, so serving my dog is serving Krishna, kind of thing. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Maharaj, would you care to comment here?
Well, here we see again, as you pointed out, it's another example of distinction. And this example is given in first canto also. Relations of the modes of nature, how sattva, rajas, and tamas are different from one another. The Agni, fire, can be taken as one. It's fire, all the smoke and the fire and the sparks and the firewood, they're all one. But on closer examination, the wood is different from the flames are different from the spark, and so on. So the living entity is different from his material body, and he's different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Maharaj, would it be all right if I read just a bit from Srila Vishwanath's commentary on this?
Always.
It certainly goes right along with what you and Srila Prabhupada are saying here. He says that the foolish person, well, I'll back up a little bit because it's a long purport. He says fire is different from wood, which is burning. And just as it is different from wood, it is different from sparks. And just as it is different from sparks, it is different from smoke, its product. The foolish person, however, will think that the wood, spark, and smoke are fire because of imagining them to be the svarup of fire. When I read that, I thought how common it is for those of us in the bodily concept to see other bodies and think there's a person, when actually when you get up real close, you see that there's a whole lot of other things that have nothing to do with personality that you're seeing, but because of ignorance, you think that's the svarup. I'm seeing a svarup. You're seeing a rup, but it's not a svarup. So Srila Vishwanath goes on to say that thus the verse means just as blazing fire is correctly different from wood, sparks, and fire, though by imagination they are considered the same, so Paramatma is different from the jiva. So he takes it a whole another dimension there. And then he says the last part of the example is in the second verse. Well, he translates these two verses, 40 and 41, together and comments on them both. So maybe we should go on to 41 before we get into that commentary and hear what Prabhupada has to say. Tulsi Priya, you have a hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to share an experience that I had once. I was in Jagannath Puri, and I went to the Swargadwar, where they do the cremations, to chant japa. And they brought in a woman's body. And I wasn't standing too close, but I could tell she was fairly young, maybe under the age of 50. And they were preparing her for the fire. And she was lying there all dressed up and garlanded and everything. And as they were lighting the fire, my mind could not accept that this person was dead, even though I knew it was the case, and they were lighting. And there was a part of my brain that kept saying, get up, get up, get up. And I was just thinking how it's so ingrained in us, I mean, just to look at a body and think that that's the person there when it's actually separate. It's not the person, it's just a body. It was just very powerful to realize how stuck in that way of thinking that I was.
Thank you very
There's a
much.
comment from Marai Gupta Prabhu in the chat.
Yeah, I'll read that. Maria Gupta Prabhu Jai. Hare Krishna, he says, why is it so hard for cultures outside of Bharat to understand the distinct difference between the self and the body? Is it due to the coverings of the modes of nature?
Well, let's look at a couple of things. First of all, I'm not sure that it's so easy for people in Bharat to understand. Otherwise, why has Srimad Bhagavatam put forward these verses? It's hard for everyone. Everyone is thinking, I'm this body. This is my wife. These are my children. This is my house. This is my money. It's not that Bharat is going on free of these illusions while the rest of the world is in deep ignorance. India has the same illusion is prevalent here. That's the first thing. But particularly outside of Bharat, there's a lot of there's ignorance of there's a lack of scriptural enlightenment. When we read Bhagavad Gita, when we read Vedic literature, it's very clear on this distinction between the body and the self. And really goes into deep philosophical discussion of it. Other scriptural writings may not be so extensively clear about it, although they do make a distinction between one's eternal soul and one's embodied existence, but we don't find the same breadth of philosophical discussion. That's one thing. And then the next thing is that in America and Europe particularly, the empiric worldview has become so prominent. So that in the scientific world, often dualists, those who see a difference between the body and the self, are scoffed at. They're unscientific, they're sentimental, and so on and so on and so on. It's a sort of, what would you say? The materialists have aligned themselves with the scientific world, and the more that materialistic science becomes accepted, the more this worldview is accepted. So that makes life harder.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. And Morai Gupta Prabhu says, thank you, Maharaj. Devi's child has a question. Hare Krishna. Is Krishna's body completely spiritual like that of our soul?
What do you suppose?
Devi's child, what do you suppose? while he's pondering that, we'll move on to Saraswati Mata. Oh, wait, is there anything physical or material?
In the spiritual world, there's nothing material. That's what makes it the spiritual world. But there's physicality in the sense of tangibility. There's form, there are qualities, there's so on. So that's what we usually think of as physical. So in that sense, there's physical. Krishna has a physical form, but it's not a material physical form. It's a spiritual physical form.
And Saraswati Mata asks, is our flawed desire in the material world of wanting a permanent situation like body, relationship, etc., a reflection of our original spiritual position, which is eternal and unchanging?
Yes.
And Tulsi Priya has a follow-up question to Maharaj's comment on the materialistic conception of the self. Please go ahead, Tulsi Priya.
So my question is, you were basically saying that this idea that the body is the self and that's all there is, becoming more and more predominant. But we also see there's a sort of populist or sentimental conception, like you'll see on television, they'll have these shows where the medium will contact relatives who have gone over to the other side, and people want to communicate with their dead relatives. So they, I think it's all a hoax, but you can see that people want to believe that there is a self that survives the body. And so it seems like there's a sort of a weird tension between thinking the body is everything, but also having this hope that there is something beyond, and they don't have any opportunity to have a proper conception of what it means to be a self without the current body that you know. And I'm just wondering, is it just sentimentality, or is it something that's sort of inborn in people that they, I guess it has to be inborn, that they really want to believe that there's a self beyond the body or existence beyond the body?
In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna refers to this as knowledge in the mode of passion. Maybe somebody knows where that is. But in the mode of passion, one gets things somewhat right. There's confusion. In the mode of ignorance, one doesn't know anything. One is in total darkness. In the mode of goodness, one is expected to have good knowledge. And in the mode of passion, there's confusion. So sometimes we have it right, sometimes we have it wrong. That's passion.
Thank you.
Yeah, there.
All right. So we have some follow-up questions from Davy's child here regarding physical and spiritual. Then why do the spiritual bodies of the gopis, why are they described with physical female body parts during Rasa Lila? There is even the description of physical intimacy. Why does a spiritual body have those parts? Why do they need the intimacy as that of a physical body? I thought the spiritual body was free from those needs. Again,
it's a question of what we mean by spiritual. Why? And again, the same point that spiritual doesn't mean that there's no form. When we say physicality, we mean having form. So Krishna has a form. The associates of Krishna have forms. The trees have forms. The peacocks have form. Everything has form. Form means physical. There's a head, there's feet, there's everything. So, in that sense, physical. But it's not the physical of this material world. Here, physical means limited. Here, physical means miserable. Here, physical means temporary. So there's physical in the spiritual world, but the physics there are different. The bodies are spiritual, the forms are spiritual, and the feelings are spiritual. It's not that in the spiritual world there are no feelings. So there's no intimacy, there's no love, there's no none of that. It's there. There's feeling. Yashoda Mai for Krishna, Krishna for Yashoda Mai. So is Krishna and the gopis, there's feeling. But that feeling is not the feeling of resulting from a false conception of life in which one imagines oneself to be something one is not, and one is trying to satisfy gross physical material senses. It's based on, it's in another world, literally.
Yes, thank you, Maharaj. And I think Maharaj has answered Devi's child's questions, even though they continue to appear there. They're quite well answered. Let's move
Could I
on to
comment on
text.
something?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It's just, we have to get rid of the assumption that just because you have a body, in the material sense, if you have a body, that means there are needs and material desires that are connected with it. But in the spiritual world, all the bodies exist for the service of Krishna, for pleasure. So there are no needs there, except the need to serve Krishna. It's not like, oh, if I don't eat, I'll die, or if I don't breathe air, I'll die. Everything that's going on with those bodies, it's just instruments for the service of Krishna to please him, and they experience pleasure through serving him. So I don't think we can make the mistake of assuming that just because it's a body, it's the same as the body in the material world. It's not. It exists on a completely different paradigm. It's not. Anyways, it's not there's not a question of need. Maharaj has made the point. I'm answering his questions. Maharaj has made the point that physical doesn't necessarily mean material. There's material, which is perishable and full of problems, and then there's physical, which is, spiritual, which is perfect and has no problems. So it's a different kind of body. It's a different kind of body, that's all.
The thought occurred to me that you look in a store window and you see a mannequin and it's physical. But that doesn't mean that when you see a real person's body is like the body of the mannequin. That physical means it must be a mannequin. But if you look inside, it'll be the same. And there's no consciousness. It's just, so there's a difference. So as there's a difference between the mannequin and the living person, there's a difference between the physical embodiment in the spiritual world and the physical body in the spiritual world. In the material world, there's a difference between body and self. In the spiritual world, there's no difference.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. And Priyanka Mataji quotes that verse 14:12, Lobha pravritir arambha karmanam ashama spriha Rajasyatani Jayante Vivridhe Bharatarshiva. Happiness in the mode of passion. Contact between the senses and the sense objects.
I'll read the chats for you.
Yeah, please.
Okay, Saraswati Mataji says, we know that Maya's illusions are so powerful and almost unbreakable, like when Dhruva Maharaj was attacked by illusions cast by Yavanas, and only his pure Krishna consciousness could break illusion. But for neophytes, how can their struggle to overcome illusions that seem so real be overcome?
Hare Krishna. That was the arrow that dispelled the illusion of the Yavanas. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram.
Radhesha Prabhu, would you be able to read text number 41?
Sure. Bhutendriyant karnat pradhanaj jiva sangitat atma tata pratag drashta bhagavan brahma sangita. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is known as Parabrahma, is the seer. He is different from the jiva soul or individual living entity, who is combined with the senses, the five elements, and consciousness. A clear conception of the complete whole is given herewith. The living entity is different from the material elements, and the supreme living entity, the personality of Godhead, who is the creator of the material elements, is also different from the individual living entity. This philosophy is propounded by Lord Chaitanya as Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. Everything is simultaneously one with and different from everything else. The cosmic manifestation created by the Supreme Lord by his material energy is also simultaneously different and non-different from him. The material energy is non-different from the Supreme Lord, but at the same time, because that energy is acting in a different way, it is different from him. Similarly, the individual living entity is one with and different from the Supreme Lord. This simultaneously one and different philosophy is the perfect conclusion of the Bhagavat school, as confirmed here by Kapila Deva. Living entities are compared to the sparks of a fire. As stated in the previous verse, fire, flame, smoke, and firewood are combined together. Here the living entity, the material elements, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are combined together. The exact position of the living entities is just like that of the sparks of a fire. They are part and parcel. The material energy is compared to the smoke. The fire is also part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. In the Vishnu Purana, it is said that whatever we can see or experience, either in the material or spiritual world, is an expansion of the different energies of the Supreme Lord. As fire distributes its light and heat from one place, the Supreme Personality of Godhead distributes his energy, different energies, all over his creation. The four principles of the Vaishnava philosophic doctrine are Shuddha Dvaita, purified oneness, Dvaita Advaita, simultaneous oneness and difference, Vishishta Advaita, and Dvaita. All four principles of Vaishnava philosophy are based on the thesis of Srimad Bhagavatam, explained in these two verses. I was just reading Dhruva Maharaj's prayers a moment ago, and I read the verse that ends, Naneva Darushu Vibhavasuvat Vibhasi. Dhruva Maharaj is praising the Supreme Lord that you're as Paramatma, or like fire is consuming wood in various shapes, Nana Eva, various forms, and therefore they're manifesting themselves differently. So all of this creation is just different manifestations, but ultimately it's you, non-different from Krishna. And then Dhruva Maharaj is saying, I've seen so many different forms. Tiryanagad Vijasarisrpadeva Daitya, Martyadibhi, all of these material forms. But now that I'm seeing you before me, now all forms of theorizing, all speculation has come to an end. It all ends with bhakti. Then all the speculation is finished when one gets what's that in Lord Brahma's prayers? Bhaktim udasyate vibho. Shreyasratim bhaktim udasyate vibho. And also prasada leshanugrahita evahi. When you get a little bit of the mercy of the Lord, then you can understand him, not by speculating for thousands of years. So this direct experience of the Lord, this uniting with the Lord in purpose, then all theorizing has come to an end. So these are the four principal Vaishnava doctrines, and recognizing the simultaneous oneness and difference, Srila Prabhupada is saying, is the ultimate realization. But I did a little bit of research on these other ones, and especially because Vishishtadvaita doesn't have parentheses next to it, so I looked it up, and Srila Prabhupada writes in various places that that's Srila Ramanujacharya's philosophy. And in that philosophy, God's energies, expansions, and incarnations are considered to be oneness in diversity. In other words, God is not separate from all of these. Everything together is God. So that's, Ramanujacharya's theory of Vishishtadvaita. All the energies of the Lord are one, but each is keeping its individuality, its Vaishishtya.
Thank you so much, Radhesha Prabhu. Maharaj, we'd love to hear what you have to say, if unless Radhesha has something more.
No, I want to hear from Maharaj as well.
I think we're going to go on to Vishwanath.
There's no Vishwanath. Oh, from the last verse.
Yes. So he's continuing from the previous verse. Pradhan is compared to the wood. The jiva is compared to the spark, since it has consciousness. The body, senses, and antakarana are compared to the smoke. Paramatma is compared to the fire. Paramatma is different from pradhan, the jiva, the body, senses, and antakarana, because he is the witness, drashta. Because he sees everything else, he is different. Though situated together with the other items, he is not contaminated, because he possesses inconceivable powers, Bhagavan. He also appears as Brahman. To some persons of certain qualifications, he makes an appearance as consciousness alone without qualities. Hare Krishna. And Saraswati Mata says, I am not sure what is meant here, that fire is also part and parcel of the Lord. It's stated that jivas are sparks of fire and smoke is Maya, but what is fire likened to?
She answers the question herself.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so Srila Vishwanath says, thus the verse means, just as blazing fire is correctly different from wood, sparks, and fire, though by imagination they are considered the same, so Paramatma is different from the jiva. All right. Elsie Priya, can you read the chat?
Okay. Praveen Prabhu says the physical forms of the living entities in the spiritual world are suitable for their relationship with Krishna. So the material forms are unsuitable for relationships with Krishna?
Ultimately, yes, they can be used for Krishna, but ultimately the eternal relationships with Krishna are exchanged on the spiritual platform, with spiritual forms, spiritual everything. So the physical forms of in the material world are awkward, but they can be used, but they're awkward. But in the spiritual world, there's no such awkwardness.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. I'm thinking we can stop here and have kirtan, if that's all right. Vijay Krishna Prabhu, it's Friday night. We would insist that you would lead kirtan if you're so inclined.
Kendra Prabhu, can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
What about my mridanga? Can you hear my mridanga?
We haven't heard it yet, but I'm sure we will.
What about now?
Actually, no.
As long as you can hear it, it's fine.
That's the point, yes.
Okay, so if you insist.
We do.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Puri Rajakacharya. Ashtottara Sata Sri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Brinda ki jai. Namacharya Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath, Shyamakund Radhakund, Giri Govardhan ki jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Navadvip Dham ki jai. Ganga Mayi ki jai. Jamuna Mayi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Tulsi Devi ki jai. Samaveta Bhakta Brinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Thank you so much, Vijay Krishna Prabhu, and thank you, Maharaj, for being with us. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila
Jai.
Prabhupada ki jai. His Holiness
Jai.
Jayadvaita Swami Maharaj ki jai.
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 Samaveta Bhakta Brinda ki jai.
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 Or Premanande.
Hari Hari Bol. Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.